you have a handheld mic, that would be fine. Oh, okay, yeah. Just leave it there. Yeah. With questions and answers. I gotta take like 5 minutes. Welcome back. How are you?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I would like to have the archivist make opening remarks before we start the meeting.
Good morning and welcome back, or welcome to, if this is your first meeting of the FOIA Advisory Committee. Welcome to the National Archives. By bringing together those inside and outside government to tackle some of the great challenges facing the Freedom of Information Act, this committee truly embodies the spirit of open government. Before addressing this committee's important work, I want to recognize that supporting the FOIA Advisory Committee is one of the many ways that the National Archives has answered the President's call to make government more transparent, collaborative, and participatory. Just last month, we published our 4th Open Government Plan, which includes 50 new commitments and builds on the more than 140 commitments we have implemented since the launch of the Open Government Directive. I'm proud to note that this year we published our plan on GitHub, which gives the public an opportunity to provide targeted feedback and suggest ways to strengthen the plan. GitHub also, and several of you have been commenting, thank you. GitHub also allows other agencies to leverage our work to build their own plans. And shortly after we published our plan, the General Service Administration used our code to design their own open government plan. So, very proud of that. Regarding this committee, it's my pleasure to announce the appointment of a new committee member, Dr. James Hirschberg. Welcome. Dr. Hirschberg is a professor of history and international affairs at GW. He has taught at Tufts and Caltech. He directed the Cold War International History Project and edits their book series. And one of those books is his own, Marigold, The Lost Chance for Peace in Vietnam. We are working on a major Vietnam exhibit here that's going to open next year, so I'll be talking to you about that. And he has a long experience with FOIA as a historian who stretches back more than 3 decades to his work on James B. Conant as an undergraduate. So welcome aboard, Dr. Hirschberg. Since this committee's last meeting, I have sent the committee's recommendations from its previous term to the Office of Management and Budget. I'm still waiting for a response. I'm pleased that the committee was able to work collaboratively to develop a consensus recommendation during its first term and look forward to reviewing its future recommendations. The work you have in front of you today is very important. Today you'll be choosing the issues you as a committee want to address during the remainder of your 2-year term. And I look forward to learning which issues you choose to address and to hearing about your progress. And so I'll now turn the program back over to Nikki Grayman. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for being here.
Morning, everyone. I'm Nikki Gramian. Before I start, please pull the microphone to closer to you when you speak. A couple of the members on the phone expressed that they can't hear us, so make sure that you speak to the microphone. I'm the acting director of the National Archives and Records Administration's Office of Government Information Services. It's also known as OGIS. And before I start the meeting, I too would like to welcome our new member, Dr. Hirschberg, to the committee. We're very happy to have you, and welcome. As you all know, the committee brings together both government and non-government FOIA experts with vast and diverse experience to advise on and make recommendations to improve the FOIA administration throughout the executive branch. The committee also provides a forum for public discussions of FOIA issues and offers members of the public the opportunity to weigh in on administration of FOIA and their ideas for improving the FOIA process. We encourage the public to share their comments and suggestions for the committee in writing. To learn more about submitting comments for the committee, please visit our website at www.ogis.archives.gov. As a reminder, information about the committee, including members' background and bios, committee's documents, and also the public comments are all available on OGIS's website. We are videotaping this meeting, and we'll make the video, the transcripts, and also the meeting materials all available on the committee's webpage as soon as possible. The videos that we post on the committee's webpage need to comply with the American with Disability Act of 1990 and the amendments to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So before we post a video on the website, we must have the meeting transcribed and review the transcription for accuracy. We expect to have all of this meeting materials available on our website within 30 days. So I thank you in advance for your patience and understanding. Next, we will spend a few minutes introducing the committee members who are around the table and also participating by telephone. During the course of this meeting, for the record, please identify yourself by name and affiliation when you speak. We will begin with the members we expect to have on the phone, and I'll ask each of you to introduce yourselves and remind the group of your profession and also affiliation. Jill?
Hi, I'm Jill Eggleston. I'm with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and I'm the Freedom of Information Act officer.
Thank you. Margaret? Do we have Margaret on?
Hi, I'm Margaret Koga. I'm on the faculty of the University of Denver Stern College Law.
Great, thank you. Now let's hear from those of you in the room, starting with the end of the table at my left. Please introduce yourselves and remind the group where you work. We'll start at the far end of the table actually to my right, beginning with Mitra. And then also we'll continue around and skipping me, of course, and ending with Dr. Hirschberg.
Thanks, Nikki. My name is Mitra Abdullahi. I'm a staff attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union.
And thank you for coming from California to attend this meeting. Yes.
Good morning. I'm William Holzerland. I'm Director of the Division of Information Disclosure with the Food and Drug Administration's Center for Devices and Radiological Health for the balance of this week.
Hi, I'm James Valvo with Cause of Action Institute. I'm counsel and senior policy advisor.
Michael Bekesha, an attorney at Judicial Watch.
Hi, Raynell Lazier. I am the FOIA manager at Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
I'm David Pritzker, a Deputy General Counsel at the Administrative Conference of the United States.
Tom Sussman with the American Bar Association.
Melanie Pastay, the Director of Office of Information Policy at Justice.
Nate Jones, National Security Archive.
Sean Moulton, Project on Government Oversight.
Stephanie Carr, Office of Secretary of Defense and Joint Staff.
Logan Perelman, attorney with the Department of Homeland Security.
Morning, I'm Chris Knox, Managing Director with Deloitte Advisory.
Ginger McCall, Department of Labor.
Jim Hirschberg, I teach history at GW, and I've indeed been filing FOIA since I was an undergraduate 35 years ago.
We're very pleased to see so many of you with an interest in FOIA here in the archivist's reception room today, and we welcome your feedback. To promote openness, transparency, and public engagement, we post the committee's updates and information to our website at, again, www.ogis.archives.gov, at our blog post, and also on Twitter. So stay up to date on the latest OGIS and FOIA Advisory Committee news, activities, and events by following us on Twitter. Our Twitter account is @FOIA_ombuds. We will take one 15-minute break halfway through this meeting at approximately 11:30, 11:45. During the break, you may wish to purchase food or drink from Charters Cafe, located 2 levels down on the ground floor, which is also where the restrooms are located. At the end of the meeting, we have set aside time for public comments. We look forward to hearing from any non-committee members who wish to comment at that time. We also welcome anyone to submit written comments to the committee at any time. With all of the administrative matters discussed, I would like to turn our attention to the approval of our July 21st meeting minutes. The committee members have had a chance to review a copy of the meeting minutes. Are there any corrections to the minutes? No? Okay, now we will entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. The minutes will be approved. Thank you. All right, so during our first meeting of the current term, there was a great deal of discussion about how compliance with the Section 508 of Rehabilitation Act might limit agencies' ability to post more records on their website, which has been released under FOIA. Thanks to Melanie, who made arrangements, we will now have 3 guests with particular expertise on Section 508 to tell us more about the law's requirements and also the agency's responsibilities. It is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Helen Chamberlain, Government-wide Section 508 Training and Outreach Director from the General Services Administration, David Capozzi, the Executive Director from U.S. Access Board, and also Timothy Cregan, the Senior Accessibility Specialist, who's also from the U.S. Access Board, who will give us their 15 to 20-minute presentation. After the presentation, we will open the floor for the committee to discuss and also ask any questions that they may have from the presenters.
Good morning. Good morning. So I'm David Capozzi. I'm the Executive Director at the Access Board. If we can fast forward one more slide, please. Thank you. So first of all, let's talk about what Section 508 is and what it was intended to do. So it is a section of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It was passed by Congress in 1998, and it was intended to essentially be a procurement vehicle for making information technology accessible to people with disabilities, both employees of the federal government and users of federal agency services. It's important to point out that Section 508 is not intended to be an accommodation law or regulation. It's essentially like a curb ramp getting into a building. It's an electronic curb ramp getting into technology, so that when a federal agency buys technology, whether it's a website or a copier machine or software, that technology is already accessible to people with disabilities before they get hired or before they try to use the government service. So it's essentially a way in to the federal government. The law requires that our agency, the Access Board, develop standards for technology and that they get incorporated into the federal acquisition regulations. We did that in 2000. They were incorporated into the FAR shortly thereafter, and we are now in the process of updating our standards because technology has changed since 2000. Everything is incorporated into one device, whereas in 2000 we had multiple devices. So we're in the process of updating our standards. Our final rule is at the Office of Management and Budget currently under review. It was just sent out to agencies for interagency review, I believe, this morning. And we hope to see those finalized before the end of this administration. The Access Board and the General Services Administration jointly provide technical assistance on the law and our standards. GSA provides technical assistance primarily on procurement issues, and the Access Board primarily provides technical assistance on the meaning behind the standards. Okay, next slide, please. So there's a few sources of technical assistance on what is meant by Section 508. One is from our agency. We do a series of webinars, 6 a year. We've been doing them for the past 3 years. They're all archived, since we're in the archives, on our website. They're fully accessible from the get-go, and people can earn continuing education credits for our webinars. So if you missed a webinar or you want to watch one, they're all available on our website, which is access-board.gov. Okay, next slide, please. Right after Section 508 was passed in 1998, a group was formed of federal agencies that had some interest and experience and expertise in accessible technology. And it was kind of a loose-knit organization of agencies, primarily to coordinate technical assistance, answers to questions that people had regarding Section 508. And that group has lived on through the years and now has its home in the Chief Information Officer's Council. It's called the Accessibility Community of Practice. Next slide, please. And in the Accessibility Community of Practice, there's 3 subcommittees. One is on vendor outreach. Another is an education subcommittee, which is primarily overseeing the webinars that we do. And the third is best practices. And Tim will talk a little bit about some of the resources that are available from the best practices subcommittee. Next slide, please. So the CIO Accessibility Community Practice is chaired by, co-chaired by 2 individuals, one from the Department of Veterans Affairs, one from the Department of Transportation. And it's a cross-section of agencies. Many of your agencies are probably represented on the Accessibility Community Practice. We meet on a regular basis to make sure that agencies are coordinated and that information that is needed for implementation is provided to agencies. And there's a rich amount of information on the website. It's cio.gov. And then if you look under groups, you'll see Accessibility Community of Practice. and there's a number of resources under that. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim, who will talk more specifically about how you make documents accessible, because I think that's really what you wanted to hear about.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tim Cregan, a Senior Accessibility Specialist at the Access Board. And what I'm going to do this morning is give you sort of the very high-level view of accessible documents. So you have at least a passing familiarity with some of the things that are involved with making a document accessible. I will just say that before we begin this, David has mentioned Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. He's mentioned the law, and he's also mentioned the technical requirements. As he said, the Access Board has the responsibility for drafting and publishing the technical requirements. For those of you who are in the room, I happen to be holding up a copy of the Federal Register from December 2000. These are the Section 508 technical standards and functional performance criteria, which are the how you do this. These are also found on our website. I just wanted you to be aware that when we're talking today, everything that we're doing is dictated because of these technical requirements. A separate issue, which David has touched on briefly with regard to the CIO Council, is implementation. The 508 law, which is also found on our website, makes it very clear that there is a division of responsibilities. Although the Access Board has the responsibility for developing and promulgating the standards and guidelines and developing technical assistance with General Services Administration, we are only responsible for enforcing 508 within our own agency. Each agency of the federal government is responsible for establishing their own 508 program and establishing their own implementation of the law. People call us for technical assistance. We have technical assistance hotlines. We're always happy to answer questions, but we are not a Supreme Court on 508. We just give you our learned opinion, and then you have to make and justify your own decisions. Next slide, please. Okay, so the question we ask is, are documents covered by Section 508? And the reason we're saying current 508 is to distinguish it from the pending rule, which we have put out and which a lot of people are sort of conflating in their own mind. The proposed rule, which is not yet effective, versus what the actual current standards say. So our current standards do have a definition for E&IT, which is Electronic and Information Technology, and that's covered in Section 1194.4, Electronic and Information Technology, E&IT, and it says that it includes information technology and any equipment or interconnected system or subsystem of equipment that is used in the creation, conversion, or duplication of data or information. So what we look to is essentially documents or data or information. And that is what you're looking at when you're looking at accessibility. Also, one of the technical assistance sites, section 508.gov, which is administered by General Services Administration, has a section of frequently asked questions. And the question, subsection C.7.1 asks, must portable document formats, PDFs, that are displayed meet the Access Board standards? And the question is yes. So the question you would have yourself, okay, so what standards do we use? Next slide, please. All right, again, guidance for documents, we're talking about section 508.gov. And again, the laws that are involved are the section 508 standards. And as part of today's presentation, I'm also going to talk about another law, which is called the WCAG, WCAG. For those of you in the room, I'm holding up a copy of the WCAG 2.0 success criteria. It stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.0. I will say that in the proposed rule that we published on our website last year, we recommended that we adopt the WCAG 2.0 Web Accessibility Guidelines as the new standards for 508. Under current 508, under the concept of equivalent facilitation, which is 1194.5, you can go ahead and use the WCAG success criteria, whatever it takes to achieve the maximum amount of accessibility. So I will just put that out there just for your information. What I'd like to do is just move very quickly through this. So we're on section 508.gov. You have guidance for documents. There's a section on the page that's called best practices. Remember David showed you the chart there's a best practices subcommittee. That subcommittee developed the materials that we're going to discuss today. Excuse me. Within it, there is the CIO Council Electronic Documents Community of Practice. And what there are two bits of technical assistance we're going to review today. One is the documents that they prepared. Their acronym is AED-COP, Accessible Electronic Documents Community of Practice. And I'm holding it up in my hand, and what it is, this is the technical assistance for making Word documents accessible. It's posted at that link, and it's really self-directed. What I'm going to do today for the rest of my time is very quickly go through a couple of screenshots just to give you a concept of what we're talking about. Similarly, there is another document which I'm holding up in my hand now, which is the Accessibility Community of Practice for PDFs, portable document formats. Since we're talking about archiving materials, we all know that PDFs are like everyone's favorite format. And the question often comes up is, well, how do you make this accessible and what's involved? Okay, let's talk about the concept of accessibility very generally. The concept of accessibility, as David used the acronym, it's like a ramp. You know, it's a ramp into a building or it's a ramp into the electronics. So if you think about it, when you have material in electronic format, it's primarily visual. And so the issue is, okay, so who might have trouble accessing visual information? Well, people who have low vision or limited vision. But if there's audio output, people with hearing loss, such as myself, might also have problems. Or if the information requires you to have fine motor control, such as take a pen and follow something on a screen or do typing. So there's a variety of ways where material could be inaccessible. There could be barriers to it. So accessibility is just saying, what's an alternative means of providing that same information? When it comes to images or text, you could make it audible. That is a way to make it accessible to someone who can't see it. You could also make it tactile. That's another way to make it accessible to someone who can't see it. What we're going to talk about today is creating accessible electronic documents. Now, what I'd like to do is, at the bottom of the page on this link, there's a link to the Section 508 content, and it's talking about creating accessible documents. You can get to that same link if you just go to the Section 508.gov webpage and just look for best practices. Next slide, please. All right, remember I held it up and I said we're going to talk about Microsoft Word 2013. Again, this is an overview. I'm sort of cherry-picking a couple of topics. When you look at making Microsoft Word accessible, there's these 5 areas that are covered. You format the document, you format the text, you format objects, you format the color, and then there's miscellaneous things that are covered. I'm just covering 2 items today. I'm covering text formatting and object formatting. Next slide, please. Okay, so what you're talking about, when you create a document and you have heading, you have a title, you have subtitles, you have indented paragraphs, you have tables. Everything on that page visually appears in a distinct and unique place, okay? So when most people type Word, you just start typing and you're hitting the indent tab. Love that indent tab. The problem with that is that someone who's blind, who tries to access this material using a screen reader, there's no structure to the page. Just like we can visually see headings, boldings, italics, and other changes in text, and we can orient ourselves and go, okay, I want main headings, or I want indented materials, or I want body material. And you can see that from the styles on the page. What you have to do in order to make that same content accessible to someone who would use a screen reader is you would have to use what's called a style sheet. And what you have on this screen is a screen capture of the homepage style sheet. If you've ever taken a look at it in Word, basically what it does, you just see the different formatting that you can use. And what it does is it identifies the components of a page. Next slide, please. So what you can do is you can either type your material, then go back and click on the style you want to render it as, a heading, a second heading, a third heading, or as bold or as body or whatever. And that will identify what style it is. So this screenshot is just giving you examples of the different heading levels and what are the font sizes and styles that are associated with it. You can also customize your style sheets and headings within this. Next slide, please. Okay, so once you're done, you can check your work. You open the navigation page, Control F, and then you click on the icon to browse headings, and what will happen is two windows will open up. There'll be your original document on one side, and the other side, if you've done this correctly, there should be an outline. And the outline should identify all your headings and your content. And it's very easy to do. And it becomes pretty obvious what we're talking about. When you do this training for yourself, you'll see what I'm talking about. This is just to give you a sense of what is involved. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, now we're going to talk about information in headers, footers, and watermarks. Again, this is an example where you have content on the page that needs to be made available to screen readers. Screen readers, let me just ask, just for purposes of illustration, how many people in this room have either seen a demonstration of a screen reader or have used one or have observed it? Okay. What I would suggest, for those of you that have Outlook on your computers, when you go back to your offices, go down to the Start menu and click on to get your programs, and keep clicking until you find the Accessibility submenu. There's a built-in program called Narrator, okay? It's like a built-in screen reader that comes in everybody's computer. I'd suggest you just turn it on and then try playing with it a bit just to see what it sounds like. Because what it is as the cursor goes over text, it will read aloud what is on the page. And if you try navigating on a page, it's very sequential. So it starts in the upper left-hand corner, and it continues straight down the page for all the markers that it has. If there is not an identifiable marker for it to identify, it just skips all of that. And when you're looking at something visually, you may not realize that stuff is not tagged appropriately. So it'd be like, say this room, a good example. We know there's table, rugs, all these barriers, right? Turn off all the lights, right? You can't see anything. And then you only discover that there's things in here by bumping into them. What accessibility is really trying to do is identify what's in the room so people can navigate the space. So again, with headers and footers, those also have to be identified on the page. Next slide, please. So the example we're giving here, you see there's a very, very, very small header. And what you do is you have to repeat the information that's in headers and footers. You have to actually put it in the body of the document, in the main part of the text, because otherwise the screen reader is not going to be able to pick it up. Because screen readers typically stay on one level. They do not go into footers or head notes. They can, but it's complicated and it's not obvious. Whereas if you're making a document that you want people to be able to review and understand, it's better to follow this as a best practice. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, you check your work, you look for your headers and footers, you go near the start of the information and see whether or not you've duplicated the information, such as respond to, by date, confidential, do not duplicate. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to talk about quotable document formats, PDFs. Okay, this is divided into the following 6 categories: preconditions, document properties, structure tags, objects, color, and miscellaneous. One of the things about PDFs that you need to consider, we all recall a few years back, maybe in the last 10 years, when PDFs started becoming really popular because there was all this free software. You download this free software and, hey, I can turn anything into a PDF. Isn't this great? Well, the problem is what you've done is created a bunch of inaccessible documents. A particular favorite is people's PDFs of their signatures. For someone using a screen reader, unless it's tagged, it's going to be signed by blank. The content is not available. So in order to make it available, you have to structure the page. You have to structure the PDF. I will speak briefly at the end about some suggested products you can use. The point on this is I'm trying to say what the technology does so you can understand why it's so important to take these steps to make it accessible. Next slide, please. Okay, tagged PDF. Again, tagged PDF is it's similar to the concept we were just looking at about style sheets. It puts markers on the page so that someone using assistive technology will be able to navigate through that page. They'll be able to go, oh, this is a header. Oh, this is a topic sentence. This is the body text. This is an image. The image has an alt tag. The alt tag says that this is the agency logo of the National Archives, etc. So what you have to do, you have to tag the PDF, and what you can do is you go to your document, hit properties, hit description, and you have to see whether or not it has a tagged PDF. If it's not a tagged PDF, then you need to sort of kick it back to the author and go, nice try, you need to do this again. Next slide, please. Here's a screenshot of what this would look like. So when you clicked on your properties and you're reading down, I know in circled in red, it's very small print, but basically it's telling you whether or not it's tagged. In this case, no. So moving on to the next slide. Okay, so screen readers rely on the tags as we talked about. What you can do is you're using Adobe Acrobat to create the tagged PDFs. And I'm mentioning that particular product because that is one of the few documents products which creates PDFs which is most commonly used to create accessible materials. So what you're doing is you're just basically following the steps here for creating your tagged PDF. So you've gone through the steps of view, show, hide, navigation pane, tags. Then you click Control, left click, and you expand all your tags and see what's there. And you select a tag to highlight the corresponding content on the page. And then if you don't see highlighting, then you turn on Highlight Content, and then you add the text that's needed. I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay, this is a screenshot of what I've just talked about. So you see on your left is the structure of the document. This is an outline of what the assistive technology is picking up. And on the right-hand side, you see how you cut and attach some of the material to make sure that there's a corresponding tag that identifies that material. So there's a lot of back and forth in making sure that the tags are in a logical reading order. So if you have a list that goes from 1 to 10, you want to make sure that the tags are in that same order. The important thing is you're creating an accessible document, meaning that you're putting this purely visual document into an alternative format where it's accessible by screen readers. Now, what I will just do is in closing, this isn't on the slides because I was thinking of this afterwards. So one of the things that you guys are very, very interested in is you're very interested in the PDF format when you're producing responses to FOIA. And one of the things that happens is it may be that when you're producing a response to FOIA, you will have to redact or remove certain information. And when you do that, you specify the reason for the redaction, FOIA section that needs to be redacted. The good news is that Adobe Acrobat includes PDF redaction in their features. The bad news is you have to follow it, and you have to pay attention to make sure that it's accessible. Because again, what you're ending up with is, at the end of the day, you want to have a document in electronic format that is tagged and labeled in such a way so that someone using a screen reader will be able to follow throughout the document, including those portions that are redacted. So just like a person who's sighted would be reading through and say, oh, big black bar, little note redacted for the following reasons, someone who's using a screen reader will have the same benefit. So thank you. My time is up, so I'm going to pass this to my colleague, Helen Chamberlain of General Services Administration. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I think Tim did a very good job on giving you a very high-level overview of the document remediation. It's really not as scary as it sounds because most of your softwares, your Microsofts and your Adobe, your PDF software, they have these tools these days built right into them. This morning I was going through a PDF PowerPoint that actually is one of our flyers here. And what I discovered, because I didn't create this document, was that the person that created this had layers upon layers upon layers of boxes. And so when I went into the PowerPoint, there's a section you can go into that checks your document, your PowerPoint, whatever it is you're doing, for accessibility. Will actually give you a list of what you need to fix and instructions on how to fix it. So they've made it a lot easier these days. But when I went in, I was driving myself crazy because on the top of my document, I have a huge, I don't know if you can see it or not, but I have a huge box. Well, there's a box and a box and a box, and all the boxes need to be labeled. So trying to figure out how to label all these parts in this document can be a little bit of a challenge. But having said that, it's really kind of easy because they make it that way for you. And the tools in the software applications are really, really comprehensive these days. I'm going to talk a little bit about my organization, the Office of Government-Wide Policy, Information Integrity and Access Division. We are part of GSA, but we're a government-wide entity. And we do a lot with the law with regard to procurement, because obviously that's what JSA does a lot of. We do a lot of procurement things. We also do a lot of training, and we have training on Section 508.gov, as Tim mentioned, in the best practices that actually gives you detailed instructions on how to do document remediation. I also have some training resources available. So if you go back to your organization and you have people that are actually going to be doing the remediation, I have some business cards. Contact me, and I'll be more than happy to work with you to set up some training for your organization for the people that are going to be actually needing to either create or remediate this information and content before it goes on the web or goes out to somebody. One thing I wanted to talk about, and I was in a FOIA meeting, I think last year, where we had two gentlemen from GSA from the 18F, and they were talking about OCRing documents, which is optical character recognition. And we got into a conversation, and we were talking about things like, okay, what if somebody wants to read the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution? What do we do then? What if I get a handwritten letter in crayon from somebody that wants some FOIA information? What do I do with it? How do I post this out onto the website so that people with a screen reader can go out there and read something like this? And this is where the invention of the OCR has come in really handy, and it is moving forward and it is evolving, and hopefully at some point in time we'll be able to take a document like the Declaration of Independence or that letter written in crayon and put it through the OCR process, and it will come up with an accessible version that someone with a screen reader can read. It does this now to a point, but obviously it's still in its growing stage. And one thing I know that you were talking about having a repository containing information from all agencies and things like this. You don't have to get upset about the fact that, well, what if I can't do this? If it creates a type of an undue burden to be able to do it, that's something that you have to justify with your agency. A lot of agencies have processes set up for this type thing. The thing that you have to remember and you have to pass on, and this goes for government agencies as well as anybody outside of government, is that you're always responsible for providing an alternate means of access for whatever the information is that the person might want. And that goes down to even if somebody has to sit with them and read it to them. So, I mean, you're always responsible for that in some form. And again, this is where we come in, because we are providing technical assistance and we're there for everybody. And if you come to us with something, a problem or an issue, we'll do our best to help you, to find a solution for it. We partner with the Access Board to provide training. We're getting ready, as David was talking about, the new regulation that's going to be coming out. We're going to be redeveloping training. GSA just got a training contract in place, which we're going to graciously share with the Access Board so that we can have a comprehensive training program. What we rely on is information from all of you. So you're our customers, and we can't read your minds. So if you need something and you want something, again, contact us and tell us what your needs are and how we can solve them. Section 508.gov does a lot of that, but again, you're our customer, we're really close to it. If there's something out there that needs to be updated or isn't there that needs to be there, again, we need to know about it because we want to make all of the information and resources that we have accessible. And again, let's see, what else did I forget here? I think that's everything that I had to say. The screen reader that Tim was talking about is called JAWS. I don't know if anyone is familiar with it or has seen it, but if you want to, I believe you can download a demo copy of it for like 30 days to load onto your machine to actually play around with and see what a person who is visually impaired hears and sees and how they navigate with the keyboard. But the electronic content is probably the most important thing because everyone needs to have equal access.
Thank you all for your presentation. I will now open the floor for the committee members to ask any questions that they have from the presenters and also raise any issues that they would like to discuss regarding the Section 508 compliance. Please. Please identify yourself.
Jim Hirschberg, historian at George Washington University. I'm also associated former director of the Woodrow Wilson Center's Cold War International History Project. You're dealing with Word documents, it seems, in much of your presentation. I'm just curious, what is your approach? And I apologize if you're going over familiar territory since I'm new to this whole issue. How do you deal with historical documents that I assume would be in PDF, and then I guess you would have to optically scan, read them, turn them into Word files, and then go through that process? And is there some sort of automatic process that is not so labor intensive that it would delay release of historical materials in a serious way?
Well, what I always tell people when I'm doing my training is that if, because I get asked a lot, well, we have to put this on the web right now. We can't wait. And I always say, well, if you absolutely positively have to or somebody's going to drop dead, then make sure there's a disclaimer when someone clicks on that link to tell somebody you are now leaving such and such. Number one, we're not responsible for the data on this website, or number two, this document has not yet been made accessible. Please contact so-and-so for an accommodation or something like that. Did you want to?
Sure. The other thing I would want to discuss, following up on Jim's question, he's raising an issue of interpretation. Remember how I said that there's a Section 508 standards, and they say what they say, and the technical assistance guides you in a certain way. The question becomes one of interpretation, and what, for example, is the agency's interpretation of something. Let's hypothesize that you're responding to a request from somebody, and it contains personally identifiable information relative to that individual. Okay, so the question would be, what gets redacted, what doesn't get redacted. Let's say that some of the material that's included is something that is open to interpretation, such as X-rays. Okay, that's a question that comes up in 508 areas all the time. So you want to make an X-ray accessible. Okay, so what are we talking about here? Let's say we're talking about a physical film X-ray. All right, that's a visual image. It's inherently visual. The question is, what would you do to identify it as text? What do you put down for the text? And the answer would be, and this is where I'm getting to James' question, is it depends on what the purpose in that circumstance is and what the agency's mission would be. So if the purpose of it is just to say this is an X-ray and we're not interpreting it, so be it. If in the original context, it was interpreted and it was said, this is an X-ray of a left distal fracture of your radius. Okay, that's what would go on the alt tab. The point is, what the material is and how it's interpreted is really going to be up to the discretion of the agency. So remember how I said that each agency has to have their own policies, and you have to think about how you do this. In an earlier life, I used to do document review. And one of the things we ran into would be you would have 5 versions of what was apparently the same document, but it had marginalia, or stuff missing, or stuff redacted, or stuff blocked out. What was significant? Well, it depends on the context. What are you trying to prove? What does this indicate? What is it going to? Metadata is another area in that. What I would think is the kind of policies that you put in place when we view that type of material are the similar thoughts you need to have when you're thinking, how would I explain this visual element to someone? What would be the point that I would be trying to make to someone? So that would be my response. It has to be customized for that entity. They have to have a policy that they would develop. 508 does not tell you all X-rays have to be described a certain way. It just says it has to be identified.
Question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Tom Sussman. Two of the issues which are frequently discussed in FOIA circles and have been by this committee are proactive disclosure, and release to one should be released to all under FOIA, which contemplates large numbers of documents, large quantities of information being made available on the web by agencies. And we are frequently told that 508 stands in the way, is an obstacle to making that happen, because the burdens, the costs, the technology, the manpower. And I guess I'm seeing a little bit of a disconnect, because on the one hand, I'm hearing from you, either there's a technology that can do it, or if it's too great a burden, the agency can go ahead with a disclaimer. And yet I'm hearing from the other side, a lot of agencies and government people, oh, no, 508 keeps us from doing it. So I think that's really the question of the day.
That would be the FOIA unit, not the agency. The FOIA personnel were making.
They're not part of the agency?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, I thought so.
But I think some of the agencies have smaller number of FOIA officers, so.
Okay, so just generally what I would say, okay, within the context of 508, I'm not addressing the FOIA implications here. Within the context of 508, the general rule is agencies, when they procure, use, develop, or maintain electronic and information technology, they must make the information and data accessible to federal employees with disabilities as well as members of the public who have access to that information. So in practical terms, what that means is every public-facing agency website, the content on that public-facing website needs to be made accessible. People who say, but it's such trouble to do this. And it's like, well, the response is, if it's important enough to be put out there to identify the agency mission, it's important enough to be made accessible. But it's such an undue burden and so outrageous and et cetera. As Helen said, there are some limited exceptions within 508. The undue burden exception is just one of them. You can contact us for further information on that. Typically, undue burden is, and it's based on case law, goes to the concept of something is so onerous and so burdensome that it couldn't be done. Another example of an exception, as it were, is if it's going to fundamentally alter the nature of the ICT. So let's say you have a spelling test, right? Okay, so giving a spelling test to somebody who's deaf, how's that going to work? Because they can't hear you. So, well, we'll caption it. Well, if you caption a spelling test, that kind of destroys the whole purpose of the spelling test, doesn't it? So that's an example of something that just can't be made accessible on its terms. The information and data could be provided in an alternative format, but that particular instance wouldn't work. Now, if you're doing a huge data dump of something, let's say you have, I don't know, somebody asked for wheat production values from the 1940s, and they're 3 feet of paper documents. So then the question is, okay, In terms of reducing that to digital formats, you can scan it. Okay, and you could scan it using software to help you create the material accessibly. So what does that mean? Okay, so let's say that it's text. So the text is your easiest example. The text is just, what it says. It's words typed out, typographical words, let's say. That's your best case scenario. As Kellen talked about, the strategy of optical character recognition could do a vast majority of your work. Nevertheless, there's probably going to be some of that material which will need review because it isn't going to come through. So, on the other extreme, let's say you have a horrible situation where it's multiple layered tables. Again, 508 provides that tables should be identified with row and column headers so someone using a screen reader can identify where that is. Now, let's say that the agency says, okay, they could make a judgment call to say we're not going to post this material publicly, or we're only going to post publicly that material which we can make accessible, okay? Whereas the other material which is not accessible, we're not going to post it, but we'll provide contact information notices so that if someone needs it provided in an accommodation format for them, we could do that. So let's say that it has to be brailled, or a description of it has to be brailled. So my point here is that 508 is a requirement on agencies. The interpretation and how far you go really depends on the circumstances. That's why it's so important that agencies really think about this and have a policy for how you're going to implement it. I would just like to point out one agency that's done a lot of work on this, a lot of thought into the issue is HUD, www.hed.gov. Google their Section 508 page. It's very good. It's very clearly laid out. It's got a number of policies. It explains what the approach of the agency is to implementing 508 and what are their considerations. One of the things we haven't even talked about, which David touched on briefly, was the CIO Council. The reason that you need that kind of top-down leadership is because someone in the trenches who's creating the document, they might be creating it because they personally know about 508 and they understand that it's a requirement. But it's management that really needs to know, okay, systemically, this is what everybody's going to do. These are the approaches we're going to do. No more untagged PDFs. No more inaccessible material being posted every day, that kind of stuff. You need to create it in an accessible format. I realize that with old, historic, archival, non-documented materials, you're in a different situation. But that's no different from what you would face anyway, correct? If someone says, give me all your materials relating to a certain issue, and let's say that the contents that you have at your agency, let's say, one example we got from Internal Revenue Service was they said, people send us tax returns written on tissue paper. How do I make that accessible? Obviously I'm not going to duplicate the tissue paper, but what I have to do is I have to extract the material and present it in a meaningful way in an alternative format. But that's true no matter what the circumstance is.
Let me just say, I just want to say one thing to address what you were asking about people saying, it's too much trouble. Every federal agency has a Section 508 coordinator or program manager. And they also have a Section 504 coordinator or program manager. Those people are the funnels that should be contacted. If you want to know who your coordinator is, you can go to section508.gov and we have a listing there. If you want more information or if you want us to assist you, you can contact me and I can help you get in touch with the proper people because I know it's an issue and I know I get the same thing outside of it even being FOIA. So, it's a unique situation. You have to deal with it one at a time because every agency does business differently, and that is one of the problems. Did you want to say something?
Melanie Pastay from Justice. David, I thought your analogy of the curb ramp, the curb, making the curb a ramp was so helpful. And I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit on that because that helped me visualize that, or yeah, maybe that's maybe it is a good use of term. It helped me understand sort of the purpose behind this is that it's not to post a notice that if you have accessibility issues, we'll do something for you. It's from the get-go, we're making sure that it's accessible.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what oftentimes gets overlooked is people think that this is a remediation.
Yeah.
Which it's not. The intent was to make government technology accessible out of the box, essentially.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't stand as a barrier to the employment of people with disabilities or to the continued employment of federal employees or to the people with disabilities from the public getting services from federal agencies. So if you think about it, because I mean, technology accessibility is sometimes hard to wrap your mind around, but if you think about it in terms of the built environment, people can kind of relate to that. And the idea with accessibility to the built environment is you don't build a ramp every time somebody knocks on your door and says, can I come in?
Right.
You build the ramp when the building is new so that people can come in.
It's already there.
Yeah.
Nate Jones from National Security Archive. A couple just quick questions and points. First of all, building off this issue of technology, I think that we as the FOIA Advisory Committee need to think about this problem. I just want to share an anecdote. I went to a FOIA training a couple months ago, and there was a booth of the FOIA technology providers that sell software to do the FOIA requests. And along with the booth, they had a sign that said 508 Solutions. And I walked up to the booth and said, terrific. What's this new technology that will make it quicker? Thank you very much for your instructions on how to do 508, but that appears to me as a layman that it possibly could be very time intensive. So I asked this FOIA provider, what's the solution? And he said, well, there's actually no solution. You have to go by page. A human being has to go through it, and we'll do it for you for a modest fee. So the situation now is people outside the government are charging for the government to give them documents that a contractor, will go through page by page. And I don't think that's acceptable, and we have to grapple with that. So that's one point. The second point, I would love, we don't have to do it right now, but if we could get the citations from you about how and when it's appropriate to do a disclaimer and how and when it's appropriate to claim undue burden, that'd be really helpful for us. And then I have more questions, but I'll just leave one more here. So there are millions of pages of documents posted on agency websites, and I suspect quite a few on the National Archives' incredible website of primary sources that are not 508 compliant. And I sure hope, and I ask your take, I sure hope that these wouldn't have to be taken down, or that beyond that the pace of continuing to post documents online should be stopped if they're not 508 compliant. And I understand very much the importance of accessibility, but I think that, to use a cliche, well, I won't do any cliches, but I think that it would be harmful if documents that are currently online were taken offline. And I just wanted to hear your take on that. Is there what's the book say about documents that are currently on agency websites that are not technically 508 compliant?
Okay, so you're asking if material's online and it's not accessible, should it be taken off? Well, my question would be is, if you're an agency and you posted this online as material and it's not accessible, what's the point? In other words, anybody who can't see, for example, let's say it's a visual issue, they can't access the material, so what are they supposed to do? Now, what Helen talked about is a possibility where you could have links to provide accommodations for people who need versions of the material. So think about it this way. What if the material was so fragile, okay, that it couldn't be scanned, okay, that it couldn't be reduced to a digital format? What are you going to do? What you might do is you might take some pictures of it or a description of it and say, for people who wish to see this material in greater detail, contact us and we can arrange a review or something like that. The point is that 508 is just providing a minimum level of access. It doesn't mean that every single human being is going to be able to use 508 to achieve access to content. Let me use a different example. This is a mobile phone that I'm holding up. Okay, so a mobile phone is made accessible because you can up the volume. You can turn up the volume control, right? That's a built-in feature. But that volume control only goes so far. That's the end of the accessibility part of it. The other aspect is people who use assistive technology, like I use a hearing aid to boost sound so I can hear better. So I can use my hearing aid to boost the volume for me personally on the phone. That's my accommodation. The 508 piece says that there will be synchronization between my phone and the hearing aid to avoid magnetic feedback and squeal. But the point is, I still need the assistive technology, okay? People are always going to need assistive technology at a certain point to achieve access to materials. And then sometimes there still won't be a way to reasonably achieve access. One example we get in our office all the time is AutoCAD. It's the type of software package that architects use. And it's visual 3D real-time renderings of built environment. It's almost impossible to make that accessible. So some things by their nature won't be able to be made accessible. But the information and data would be provided somehow in an alternative format.
So,
Just a short answer to your question. So I think it was Melanie who sent around to us a draft policy statement. We provided information back. So there's a policy statement that's being worked on by this committee. So.
but can I just ask one more time? Of the millions of pages of documents on the website that are not 508 compliant, is the policy that they should be removed? No.
Right,
I'm hearing no.
either make it accessible or take it off.
Can I strongly object to that?
So,
I mean,
Okay.
there are different imperatives to balance. Accessibility is good, but so is openness and transparency, and also accessibility for the people who can see it, because it would impair their rights if you started taking
Right.
historical documents down. That would be absurd.
Again, going back to what I said, no, we are not saying that you need to remove these things. We are not saying that you can't use it. All we're saying is that you still have the responsibility. So if you put that disclaimer out there and somebody calls you and says, I want to know what that crayon letter said, you can get somebody on the phone with them or knock on their door or do whatever you need to do. The same thing goes for any kind of content. So for example, if you have content on your website that has a link to another website, have you ever seen when you click a link, there a little box pops up and says you are now leaving? Well, you add, we are not responsible for the accessibility of the content where you're going. So, I mean, you know,
I think it would help though if you don't, if you would, we understand that there's like what I would call the outlier.
Yeah.
The Declaration of Independence, the
Right.
thing in crayon. So let's, I think what's more, I guess maybe more relevant to our discussion is, you know, typed documents. We're not, you know, just the sort of the everyday documents that are in agency files that are subject to FOIA requests and that would get posted. Emails is a huge example.
Again, if
they
you-
have to be made accessible.
If it's text and if it's an email or if it's a Microsoft Word document or even a PDF document, they can all be made accessible. If you're talking about something out of the ordinary, then again, I never, when I do my training, I never say, no, you can't do it. You just have to justify why you're doing it to your management. You have to justify why you're making the purchase. You have to justify why you're not making this document accessible to cover not only yourself, but your agency, because you could be sued. Somebody could come up and say, well, I need this document and you're not doing anything to help me. There's nothing on your website that even tells me where I can go to talk to somebody.
But fundamentally, doesn't 508 impose a requirement on agencies to make the documents accessible when
Yes.
they post them? Like,
Yes.
that's the sort of the
And
bottom
that's-
line.
yes. Yeah.
And it's been that way for a long time.
But you know what? It's like a can of worms. You know, you're just going to go
There's
round
lots
and
of
round.
exceptions
There's
and
lots
different
of
things.
exceptions. That's why I
Yeah.
always say it's case by case. I take my agencies and whatever problems they have, we deal with them because they don't necessarily do it the same as this agency over here. So, yes, if you're creating new documents from the beginning, yes. If you've got documents that are already created, then you have to try and make them accessible. If you can't, then you are responsible to provide that link for the person to go to somebody or a mailbox or somewhere to get that information.
And so that's,
Sorry, Sean.
Sean Moulton with Project of Government Oversight. And that's what I wanted to just drill down on a little bit. So when you say if you can't, and sometimes you can't, as you've talked about, because things are inherently unable to be translated and made accessible. But I think some people would say, if we're dealing, as Nate was saying, with millions of records, there becomes, we can't because of the volume. We can't make them all accessible at the same time, but we would like to still post them. Are you saying that if you provided this alternate access for those documents, a link or something where someone would, if there was a link, let's say, that someone could get a live person on the phone who would then read the document live to them, any documents that they wanted, would that count as them being 508 compliant?
Your first responsibility is to make it accessible if at all possible. That's your first and foremost responsibility. If you can't make it accessible for whatever reason, if it's that crayon or the Declaration of Independence or whatever it is, then that's where the disclaimer would come in. But your first responsibility is, if it's at all possible, to make it accessible. The bottom line is that, in my mind anyway, is that people want access to information. And it's our responsibility as the federal government to make sure they can have it in whatever form that is plausible for us to do. And again, number one responsibility is everything must be accessible, everything you can make accessible. If you can't make it accessible, then your responsibility still is to provide something that the person can go to get it.
Well, I guess my other question would be, if the 508 compliance is also in place internally for agencies for their people who might have access, employees who might have access issues, why is it that so many of the records that are coming out still today that have been created in the last 10 years are still not 508 compliant and have to be done after the fact, which makes it more burdensome and more difficult, and we don't seem to, and that always becomes then the problem to greater access for everybody, and there seems to be no solution of the document creation.
Can I weigh in on that real quick? This is William Holzerland at the FDA, and you're touching on a very important point that I actually wanted to bring up as well. And I think this is a very important conversation that we have, and I thank you for sharing this guidance with the committee, particularly with our colleagues in civil society, so that we can collaborate on potential solutions so that these types of issues won't be a barrier for anybody, so we can make records accessible through FOIA and other means. But I'm sort of hearing two things here, which is that the responsibility to bake the compliance in from the beginning, from record creation, is really the primary responsibility, and then sort of that on an as-needed basis, we address other sort of one-offs or odd issues, old records, things that weren't created in a format that's conducive to making access an easy thing to address. But I think, Sean, to touch on what you mentioned at the end, one thing that we deal with at the Food and Drug Administration would be, in my center, applications from companies to legally market medical devices in the United States. So it's essentially unsolicited correspondence, right? And they can come in electronic form, paper form. Paper would be a little bit easier, and then we could scan it in and then make theoretically a record accessible. What about when you get an electronic application, a marketed device that is not created in an accessible form, and it arrives locked with password protected so that we can't change it, and these sorts of issues. And these records they can run into the tens and in some cases hundreds of thousands of pages. So we wrestle with the exact issue that we're talking about here, where we may make our best efforts to make the record accessible, but there may be significant resource barriers to doing so. So I'm certainly open to hearing any kind of ideas from any party that I can steal shamelessly. to employ at my agency so that we can make records accessible to the widest possible audience without doing what Nate suggests, and that, avoiding making them accessible because of this resource issue. Sure.
Well, and Logan Perel from Department of Homeland Security, similar to Bill, I mean, there's this obligation to produce what we already have under FOIA, and the tension I'm seeing is, if I have a Word document, I now have to recreate the header. I'm now creating a new document, which is not our obligation under FOIA, this is the problem, right? I mean, we're modifying existing documents. He's got unsolicited correspondence. In my case, our agency deals with classified information, which is not on a system available to the public, so you're now changing computers, computer networks, and that just can create, a lot of issues. So it seems like these two things are in tension with each other, which is make available what we already have in the form and format it is, with the appropriate redactions and the codes applied that the statute allows us, and the other side, which is the side you guys are talking about today, which is make it available so everyone in any possible way can see it in that format. And I think what we recognize, or we're failing to recognize, is our agencies, at least my agency specifically, we don't create a lot of things, I think, with 508 in mind, which means when we come to FOIA, we're now dealing with thousands and millions of pages that are what they are, and then the question is, what do we do? And I think that's where we need guidance. Yes.
Homeland Security. Yeah. Homeland Security probably has one of the better 508 programs. Bill Peterson is the person to talk to. I mean, they're one of the leaders in accessibility. So, left hand, right hand, there. We don't want to take up your entire meeting, but just a quick takeaway. I mean, I understand how you're struggling with document accessibility. Websites for the federal government have been required to be accessible since 2000. So this shouldn't be news to a lot of federal agencies. In terms of document accessibility, it is a relatively new area of focus. And I think when we come out with our final rule updating the 508 standards, you will see a lot more detailed discussion about how to and why about providing accessible documents. So, and now there's a lot more resources than there were before. In 2000, there weren't a lot of resources of how to make documents accessible. Now, Adobe has a built-in accessibility checker. That didn't exist before. So there is more resources available to make things a little bit easier. And I understand that people are going to struggle with it, and it's not always a binary yes/no answer. So
I think one of the things I heard you say, this is Nikki Gramian, I heard you say was that now that individuals who are creating new documents are required to tag those documents, and I think something that you said was, if it's not, you'll send it back and say, this hasn't been tagged.
we're not going to say.
Does the FOIA unit need to send this back to the creator and say, sorry, you didn't tag this? I mean, I could see the head of the agency go nuts and say, excuse me.
What, to
I mean, that's, I mean,
document creator
the,
at the agency, not the, yeah.
The other thing about 508 is that it's part of a whole bunch of things you have to consider at the same time. I think you made mention, Nikki, there's also the FOIA responsibility. So think about it. When you respond to FOIA, if you were just doing, reproduction of photocopies, you just photocopy it, right? You redact what you need to redact and you send it off. You're not interpreting it, you're not explaining it, it's just here it is. And in a similar way, you have to balance that responsibility through the prism of 508. Remember when I talked about the whole issue with alt tags? That has nothing to do with FOIA, but the alt tag issue comes up because that depends on the circumstance. Is this being produced because I'm giving a diagnosis? Is it because I'm identifying what it is? Is it, where am I going on this? So there's a lot to be thought about the institutionalization of 508 and the materials. And like Helen and David and I have all been saying, We can share the expertise with you. We can point you in the direction of agencies that have particularly good policies, who've thought about this a lot. Homeland Security is certainly one of them. HUD is another, Social Security Administration. They all have thought about this a lot, and they put a lot of their guidance on the web.
I want to thank you all so much.
Yes.
We knew that you'd get a lot of questions, and we appreciate it. We don't mean to have it be like a, coming at you from all angles. We really do appreciate it, because it's obviously, it's complicated. It's not easy. It's like you said, there's standards, there's gradations, there's just lots to it, and we really do appreciate you, your time, especially explaining it to us. Thank you.
And do we have a copy of your slides so that we could post it on our website as well? And, okay, that would be great.
Just a quick question before,
Yes, of
before we
course.
move off this. One of the things I'm wondering is, if a document isn't, if a document's released to me in a FOIA request, obviously, it doesn't have to be made 508 compliant. And so, I guess what I'm wondering is, if there was an index, an online index of FOIA release materials, sort of a card catalog, that named the document and that index was accessible and could be done by a readable, and you could check off the documents you wanted, and thereby were requesting them, and they were sent to you, would it be required that all documents inside that library be 508 compliant then? Or could they be made 508 compliant upon request? Why? Right now, if I request something through FOIA or another means, it
just
doesn't
sending you
have to
paper.
be 508 compliant before I request
Are
it.
you saying that the documents exist, but you can't see them? Or
Yes. I'm saying it's a card catalog, it's an index, emails between Secretary Clinton and so-and-so, and I say, I would like that document, I click on a checkbox, and the document has to be sent to me
So long as
in my
nobody
email.
can get it online, then everybody's in the same boat.
No, not online, I'm saying it would be sent to me
I understand
electronically.
what you're saying. My question is so long as nobody can get it online, and all they can see is the title, then the title has to be accessible. If the document is not physically on the website, there's no obligation, because you haven't provided a document to anybody.
But can you provide it on the website?
If you put it on the website, then it has to be accessible.
Well, listen, listen, accessibility to people who have a need for accommodation is important, but accessibility to the general public is important too. The point of FOIA is to make as much as possible, as quickly as possible, to the maximum audience. And following up on Tom's comment, again, I'm new to this issue, 508 should not be an excuse or a reason to delay release of material. And again, for recently produced material, there certainly should be an obligation to make it as accessible as possible in conformance with 508, especially since the law came into effect. But historians are waiting on material 50, 60, 70 years old and more. The CIA was created in 1947. We're still waiting for documents produced then. There's no reason why material that might be difficult or time-consuming or very costly, for which Congress might not have mandated funds to produce completely accessible versions of, there's no reason why material can't be put online while a good faith effort is made to make it more accessible. To use it to deny access to whatever percentage of people don't need the complete accessibility provisions really contradicts the whole point that the archivist was talking about, that the purpose of FOIA is maximum openness and transparency.
It sounds like you all need to have some discussion amongst yourselves. We're trying.
Well, I'm just talking for me as a historian.
That's fine. We're trying to provide you with information about what the law requires. You have two laws, the FOIA Act and Section 508. They both stand on their face. And we provided you with some information about how to make documents accessible. You all sounds like you need to have some more discussion about the implications of both laws.
Yeah, we appreciate you all coming
Very
and
much.
explaining it to us. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We can now, yes, of course.
What's the OIP, or is it an OIP or a policy statement that was sent around that you're creating?
Right.
That was referred to?
You know, that's an internal thing we're talking about, he's referring to.
Internal to the Justice Department?
Is that just justice?
It's, he's talking.
He let the cat out of the
I
bag.
know.
so I might as well explain it.
Yeah. It's part of our drafting of the release to one, release to all policy. We're checking in with them, obviously, for that.
Good idea.
Anyone else has any questions? All right, we can now pause for a short break and resume. And resume in about 15 minutes. Please feel free to visit the Charters Cafe and also the restrooms on the ground floor, which is 2 levels down. Thank you.
It was good. I knew people needed to hear it. Yes. You see, it's really complicated.
Find some kind of balance.
There's no easy answer. It is. I mean, it's.
It did seem that way, yeah. They pushed back on that. I saw it. Is that a, we can't do it? They're like, no.
You go first, how are you?